All right. Well, I'm excited to be sitting here with Garrett Kopp, right? Garrett Kopp.
Yes.
And I just was doing my due diligence here to learn a little bit about Garrett and his company. And I think it's fascinating that he started this company when he was 15 years old. And he's had some major milestones at a very young age. So I can't wait to talk a little bit more about Birch Boys, about the power of mushrooms. And, I noticed when I was looking at your website, Garrett, and just doing a little background there that you were really introduced to the healing properties of fungi from your grandmother. And your grandmother had some pretty severe health challenges. I'm sure you can tell us a little bit more about that story. And she showed you when you were really young, mowing her grass and coming over and spending time with grandmother. And she imparted her wisdom about the healing properties that mushrooms can provide. So, and then you had another milestone when you were 18, raising like $60,000 and having your first launch at a farmer's market or something of the like in upstate New York. And another thing that really stood out to me is your big vision for this company, because it's not just mushrooms, tinctures, and things like that, but it's real advocacy for, owning land and sustainability and ethical and this forestry type approach or land stewardship. And I really respect that and think that's pretty fascinating. It's such a great opportunity to inform people of things we don't know, but they're critical to know. And so I look forward to hearing a little bit more about that. Of course, there's lots of things to say, and I'll let you fill in the gaps as we go. But just to hand it over to you and ask you to speak about, you had mentioned before there are three kingdoms of life: plants, animals, and mushrooms. And I don't think that many people would really realize the power of putting it in its own kingdom. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think technically there's five, just to correct my own words.
Okay.
I forget what the other two are, protozoa and something else. But the three major kingdoms of life are plants, animals, and fungi. And from what I understand, in the order that we developed, it was plants first, and then basically plants split from fungi, and then like a million years later animals and fungi split from each other. So we're actually more closely related to fungi than we are plants genetically, uh,
Wow.
in our DNA.
We human beings are more genetically related to fungi than to plants. That's really fascinating. Or animals?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, animals, and not only humans, animals are more closely related to fungi than we are plants.
I see. Okay, yeah, that's really cool. Do you have a personal? I know your grandmother had a journey with using mushrooms for her health, and you can tell us a little bit about that. But I was also curious because I had heard you speak about that in different podcasts. Um, do you have your own journey with the use of fungi?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would say that there's two things. The first is that when I started drinking chaga, I literally, like, I was 15, so I built this business. So I mean, I was drinking chaga, and I really feel like the motivational energy and just the motivation to build this business. I feel like in part that came from the fact I was drinking chaga every single day, um, and it was just a great way to start my day. It gave me energy. Of course, I learned about it when I was so young that it's not like I had a health ailment or something like that that I came to try and heal with mushrooms. I learned about chaga from my grandmother, and basically I just noticed she was trying to knock this fungus off of the trees with her cane, and I started picking it for her like any grandson would, and we started taking it to farmers markets together. And actually, it's been more through other people that I've seen the healing powers and the benefits. But the one experience I have had personally, which I would consider a personal experience, is with my dog. I have a dachshund. He's now 13 years old. He's alive and well. This started when he was 8 years old, and I actually wrote a blog about it on my website. But my dog's name is Joey. He's a wiener dog. He had a condition. Well, we didn't know what it was, but one day we let him out to go to the bathroom, and he just started crying and screaming, and he was like I don't mean to be graphic, but he was like pooping out blood.
Oh, and so much
And
pain.
he was in a lot of pain, and he had this lump on, and what then we, paid closer attention. He had this lump on the side of his butt. And mind you, he was my brother's dog. My brother moved to Georgia when Joey was 7. So this is my first year of owning this dog by myself. I took Joey in because I didn't want him to go to a stranger. And I was 21 years old. I was very young. And I'm dealing with this dog who has
Oh my
this
God,
health
I would have freaked
emergency.
out. I would have freaked out.
I was freaking out. Yeah, it was really scary. And basically, he had a tumor. He had cancer, and we took him to the vet, and she basically did a biopsy and all of that. But the tumor was too big to surgically remove without causing a lot of damage, basically, or she was uncomfortable trying to remove it. And so what we immediately did was just put him on this custom diet, and it was more than just incorporating mushrooms. We took him off of any dry dog food and started just making all of his food by scratch, from scratch, and which included meat and other things. But basically, what we did was we took the turkey tail, we made turkey tail tea because turkey tail has polysaccharide crestin in it, which is water soluble. So polysaccharide crestin is used in Japan as a cancer treatment, and they get it from turkey tail. There's clinical data on it. It's tried and true. And so we were just brewing turkey tail tea, and we would take gelatin and we would make turkey tail jello, and we would just mash that in with his food. We would also use a little bit of chaga tincture and some other tinctures, but it was hard to get him to drink something, so we figured by mixing it with gelatin, we could mash it into his food. And the one nice thing that was working on our side is that Joey has an incredible appetite. He will always eat anything that is edible. So he ate the turkey tail, and within it's detailed in my blog, but I want to say it was within like 3 weeks, the tumor shrunk from about a golf ball size to the size of a dime or so. And the
Wow.
vet we were working closely with, she went in immediately. She surgically removed it, and he's been cancer free ever since. The whole ordeal did leave him with a perineal hernia. So we still have to monitor his food. We still have to be careful because where the surgery was, it basically messed up the muscle that holds his colon in place. So
Oh, poor Joey.
yeah,
Oh,
but he's doing well, and I think a lot of people read that blog and they assume that he's passed, but Joey's doing very well today.
well,
He's
I'm glad
13.
to hear it. Glad to hear it. Joey's still alive and well. And I am just guessing here, but I wonder if they would have given him a diagnosis of, this is the end at the time when you found the tumor.
It was the very first appointment. It was a dark appointment. It was very sad. And it was like I remember I got back to my office and he was laying down next to me, and I was like, you know, if everything that I'm doing is true and everything I've been told and read about these mushrooms is true, then I'm in the best position one could possibly be in to try and make a difference. And so we might as well try. And that
Right.
was my attitude about it. And there's a lot I've learned over the years. Like my grandmother, she did pass away from pancreatic cancer, but I didn't know then that it's the alcohol soluble triterpenes in chaga that really have those anti-cancer benefits. And we were drinking chaga tea, which is good for your immune system, and indirectly, I guess, good for what we were trying to do. But I've learned so much since then, and that through my customers now it's just undeniable. It's pretty remarkable what nature gives us. That's medicine.
I guess so. It really is remarkable. What do you think it was like at the time when, you're giving such a horrible diagnosis and you're not walking away with a lot of hope, and then you just decide somewhere, is it for people who have that experience, whether it's with their pet or their personal experience or a family member, something has to light a fire under you to say, I'm going to try this, perhaps unconventional method to help heal this. What do you think it was within you that lit that fire?
I think, you know, it was a couple things with Joey. One thing I noticed immediately was once we put him on the new diet and incorporated mushrooms into his food, it was not just like the tumor that shrunk. It was like immediately in every area of his health and well-being and his attitude and his energy levels, he started showing a positive effect. And it was kind of interesting because, it's very easy when you can control all the variables, like with your dog, you can literally say, no, you can't eat that. Yes, you can eat this. You take free will out of the equation.
Hmm.
Um, and it's remarkable how much of a difference it makes. His energy levels, his playfulness. It's sometimes hard for us to do that with ourselves, I think, because we're stuck in our habits. And if it was left up to my dog, of course, he would eat literally anything. you
Right.
know, um, so that to me made a big difference and showed me like, okay, I should keep doing this. Um, but also I would say that's just part of who I am. Like I definitely am not a quitter. I tend to be an optimist, sometimes even to a dangerous degree. So, um, yeah,
Yeah. It seems like to me that as to be an entrepreneur, especially to be one young, well, maybe at any age, really, I mean, really at any age, is that you have to have almost an insane level of faith in what it is that you're doing. Does that sound relatable?
yeah, a reckless level of faith, actually.
Yeah, yeah. So when you mentioned about the turkey tail and the chaga, do they both have anti-cancerous benefits, or is one stronger than the other for that?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, in terms of whether or not one is stronger than the other, I don't know if that is, I don't know if there's enough science to really answer that. But like, there's different constituents in chaga and different constituents in turkey tail that have anti-cancer properties. In turkey tail, it's the polysaccharide crestin and the polysaccharide peptide, and those happen to be water soluble. In other words, they dissolve or come out in a tea or a basic hot water extraction. If you brew turkey tail, you're going to get those compounds. In chaga, they are a little bit more complex compounds, and they actually have to be broken down in alcohol. There's a couple other things that make them soluble, but water is not one of them. So like chaga, that's ultimately why I started doing tinctures, is the discovery that there's all these other compounds in the mushrooms that you're not getting out of a tea alone. So I would say that it depends how you're taking it. A turkey tail tea and a chaga alcohol extract are both going to have those benefits, but it's different compounds. And there's studies on those compounds and on certain dosages of those compounds on animals. But all that we really know when we do these extractions is that that compound is present. We don't really know the quantity. We don't really know the dosage. And one thing I'll mention that I learned throughout working with my vet is that doctors and vets and people from that world of Western medicine, they tend to think and read in terms of milligrams. And I think that's a helpful thing sometimes, because um, we don't really know how many milligrams of polysaccharide crestin were in the gelatin that we were giving my dog. Likewise, we don't know how many milligrams of inotodiol or betulinic acid are in our chaga tinctures, but we actually are taking the first steps to figuring that out. I found a lab called Alchemist Labs that does test for these things, and
Oh,
so
great.
there is a way to have the holistic world and the Western medicine world communicate effectively, I think, which is just by trying to get proven analysis by an accredited lab
I
on
love
these
that. You
constituents.
must, I mean, you're on it because I think it was that last podcast that you were on, or, the one that you shared with me where you said, I would like to have a lab. And now you're telling me I
Yes.
have a lab.
Yes, Alchemist Labs. I just got a quote. I'm gonna do it. It's expensive, but we just did really well with Black Friday sales, and I'm gonna do it. So
And well worth it because the research and the information you'll get from it will probably pay dividends. So that's great
yeah,
news. Congratulations. Okay, so what should a novice like me, someone who might be starting to have, some need for use of the mushrooms and just not really knowing much about it, what should a novice really know about potentially starting to use tinctures and from Birch Boys?
yeah. Um, so the first thing I would say is that not every body reacts the same to everything. Everybody's a little bit different. So um, take that into consideration. Some of our customers only use like 2 milliliters per day of the tinctures. We have a daily serving of 4 milliliters per day, which I think kind of is like scary to some people because like a lot of tinctures will say use 5 to 10 drops. 4 milliliters is like 4 full squeezes of your tincture dropper. So that's a lot more than 5 to 10 drops. But I had developed that based on a lot of reading and a lot of literature on the compounds that matter and what they do at different dosages, and then also with accredited analysis of our tinctures. So we have sent our tinctures to the lab to test for beta glucans, to test for polyphenols, to test for some other things that we do know how to test for. And that's basically how we developed our dosage. Some people will feel the benefits of a tincture at 2 milliliters a day. I'm the type of person that can drink a cup of coffee and then fall back asleep. So I use 4 full milliliters per day of any of the tinctures. I also think that it's helpful. I wouldn't necessarily say important. I almost said important, but it's helpful to start by using one mushroom at a time.
Mhm.
Just because that way, if it's reishi mushroom that you're really responding positively to, or maybe turkey tail that you're responding negatively to, then you actually know which mushroom your body likes, or needs.
Yeah, makes sense. You want to isolate what you're doing so you can realize this is that, correlate them together instead of having a multiple blended approach. And then you're like, you don't even know what's going on. So that's good.
Right. Yeah, and we do a fungi 5 tincture, and I was reluctant to even make that product because of this point. But I do also recognize that everyone's busy today, and everyone wants something easy. And so if you do respond positively to all the mushrooms, we do have a fungi 5 tincture, which is a blend of all of them. But the fungi 5, because there's only so much room to brew the mushrooms in the amount of water we use, it is a diluted version of each of the mushrooms, right? You're getting 1/5 of the potency of each mushroom in that fungi 5 tincture than you would in a single tincture of that species specifically. So like a chaga tincture, is going to have 5 times as much chaga as a fungi 5 tincture would. Um,
I see. And maybe like you can think of the fungi five as like for advanced mushroom students.
yeah,
Once you like if you have a challenge and you go to try to use one of the mushroom tinctures to alleviate that challenge and then you realize, oh, this other mushroom could help me, then maybe, you sort of like graduate to that level.
yeah. I think that's the best way to do it because then you actually know. And there are people who will like very clearly identify that like okay they need lion's mane and that's basically it,
Yeah,
um, or vice versa with another mushroom.
I see. So, how do you incorporate mushrooms into your routine? Is it like a morning routine thing or is it throughout the day?
The most important thing is consistency. So with the mushroom tinctures, use them every day. If it doesn't really matter all that much, whether it's the morning, the afternoon, the evening, the most important thing is that you're doing it every day. So don't feel bad if you forget one morning, just take it that day. Um, that being said, the way I like to do it, just because it seems to make sense to me, um, I don't ever do it on an empty stomach, but I do it when my blood sugar is still sort of in like a fasting state. So basically, I take it in the morning and I do the lion's mane and the chaga and the artist conch every day right now and I take them in the morning basically with my breakfast or after eating a light breakfast. So I'm not putting them into a directly empty stomach just because, and especially if it's your first time using them, I wouldn't do that. I would definitely eat something first just because, there's different proteins and carbohydrates in the mushrooms. And if your body has just never been exposed to them before, you might have a little bit of gastrointestinal upset as you are exposed to these things for the first time. A lot of these are just like complex long chain compounds that if the body hasn't ever seen before, you might just have a little bit of an adjustment. So if you do have that, it's okay to give it another go. Try it a couple days and see if it persists. If it persists, then maybe there's something else going on. But typically there is an adjustment, especially if you haven't really eaten many mushrooms or explored mushroom supplements before. Your body will
Mhm.
typically need to adjust a little bit.
That makes sense. The same thing with variety of different supplements when they approach that and or change of diet even. I mean, a lot of these things you have to ease into, so that makes sense. So, what are some of the top challenges of like when people find you, what challenges are they trying to resolve with mushrooms?
Um, I think a lot of people are looking for focus, energy, just sort of something to help them do more and be more productive. I know that's a big one, and we sell a lot of lion's mane for that. That's
Mm.
basically the core benefit of lion's mane is cognitive function, memory, focus, also mood, depression and anxiety. There's some studies that show lion's mane can help women with depression and anxiety. Um, but also the immune system, probably the biggest underlying benefit that also is shared by all of the mushrooms is immune support. So you don't always feel immune support. I'd say that often you don't. Maybe never you feel that unless you don't get sick, right? That's how you feel that your immune system is
Right.
working. But I know like when COVID-19 hit the scene, um, that actually it was a really remarkable time for us because I had raised some money from investors, and basically we were about to run out of that before COVID hit, and I was at the point where I didn't know if this business was going to succeed or if I was going to fail, and it was looking like all the signs were pointing toward failure, to be honest. And COVID-19 hit, and the interest in just the interest in boosting the immune system in all of the mushrooms, chaga in particular, just skyrocketed. It went like viral, literally. And fortunately, since we wild harvest our mushrooms locally, and we had this internal supply chain, and we were vertically integrated. So a lot of our biggest competitors went out of stock, but we stayed totally in stock the entire time. And a lot of the people who were getting laid off from work were just helping us go into the woods and find more mushrooms. Um,
Oh,
but that really showed me, wow, there was a change in people. I think when COVID hit, and people just started thinking more about their health and their immune system. And the mushrooms definitely are all very good for that. I think chaga is the best for that, but I think all the mushrooms are good for that. And then other than that, other than like the focus memory, cognitive performance, and the immune system benefits, I would say that it's all over the map. People come to us with some very specific inquiries, and sometimes I don't know how to solve them. I don't always know, and every time something new is brought to our attention, though, it's a good opportunity to learn and to read through the literature and see if there's anything on that subject. But all over the map, all
yeah.
sorts of ailments.
Absolutely. And I mean, you said so many things there that makes me have different ideas, but one is, you know, that you have reason for starting this conversation or having this podcast as a platform is because I very much believe in we each have to be our own health advocate, right? So like we each have to take responsibility for our own health, and that can be very hard to do, especially once we get into a situation that's really difficult to reverse. But like I think I caught a phrase in your bio too about the body's innate need or ability to heal. And so we just create the right conditions and supply it with the right things, there's a miraculous amount of healing that can happen. But being educated, finding the right allies, finding the people who can help you support that, fill in the gaps from different knowledge is so important. So it's interesting to know that you're having people come with very specific, we also experience that a lot at the store in Naples. But I already know from this conversation, I was taking note that I want to get some lion's mane and I want to get some turkey tail. I think might make some turkey tail jello this weekend. Why not? Boost my immunity or cancer fighting ability. So now, all right. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about your grandmother's health journey, and you mentioned she had pancreatic cancer. And that is such a devastating diagnosis. But could you share a little bit about like her journey with that? Because I don't think that she found it you know early, from what I gathered, at least. Like it was a pretty advanced by the time she was trying to address it, right? So could you maybe
Yeah,
share like from the beginning to end a little bit with like her journey with that?
absolutely. I forget whose birthday it was. It was either mine or my brother's, but we had a birthday party and we were all eating steak, and she was over. And this was like one of the first signs that we realized, and she realized she just wouldn't eat. She didn't want to eat the steak, and that was like or she couldn't eat. She said she just felt like she couldn't, and that was unusual. But then she went to the hospital, and of course, there's always like this big several month delay after going and getting checked out for the symptom that you actually find out what's going on. And she found out it was pancreatic cancer. It was basically told to her and then told to us that it was a pretty bad prognosis. Like she was probably going to die.
Mm.
Um, but we all just kind of ignored that, I guess, and we kind of just followed her lead. And she was a huge optimist, even before cancer or anything like that. She was just like a very kind, open-minded person, and she was always looking at the glass half full. And her attitude during that time in her life was like, um, really kind of, really just kind of inspiring. The whole reason I learned about chaga is just because I was mowing her lawn and it was a freak accident. I came inside because I was thirsty, and she had this jug of tea in her fridge, and I drank it. And when she came in and saw me drinking it, of course, she had just harvested this chaga out of her backyard because she had learned about it, and she had learned it has these healing properties. And so she's, showing me the chaga, pulling me into her backyard to show me how it grows and what it looks like. And just to see her so open-minded, energetic, and inspired, like with the passion of a child about this fungus that she was drinking, it was really cool. And so then we started selling it together at farmers markets. And so that's the other part of the story is, I actually was doing that at 15. She used to knit scarves and mittens and pot holders and different things. In fact, right here,
Oh yeah.
she knitted me this
Oh
actually.
wow. That's a beautiful
Every
blanket.
color represents a different, like our mascot is the lumberjack, so that's the red and the
Oh,
black.
awesome.
I don't know if the video will be included in this, but
That's okay. Yeah, it might be.
so it was just like one of these things that she did, and if it weren't for her going around and selling these things at farmers markets, I wouldn't have started selling chaga at farmers markets. So I'm just blessed to have had her, as who she was in my life. And the cancer was just sort of what brought me to learn about chaga, and it actually brought us very close at the end of her life because we got to at least bond over chaga. So
Wow, wow, I bet. Now, was she starting to use the chaga like after she got the diagnosis, or was she already on to chaga before?
she she was diagnosed before she learned about chaga, and then she went to Maine with the Tupper Lake Adult Center, which is basically a senior citizens club that would they do like fun things together. They went on this foraging trip in Maine, and it was someone in Maine that taught them about chaga while on this foraging trip, and he mentioned all of these benefits, and that's how she learned about it. And it just so happened that chaga was growing in her backyard on one of her birch trees, and she noticed that when she got home. And that was, maybe a week before I accidentally drank the tea.
Wow, if you connect the dots, you start looking backwards and you connect all those dots, it's like kismet. I love that word. Like just fate, like so meant to be that she carved the path for you to then really get on that and soar with it with this company. So that's pretty cool story. Um, and I'm so sorry to hear that you lost your grandmother. How long ago was that?
That was in 2018. And actually, so you had mentioned earlier, I had raised $60,000. It was literally like a month after I had raised that $60,000. So at the end of her life, that Christmas, it was as 2017 turned to 2018. We always used to have Christmas at her house, Christmas Eve. It was a tradition. And things got really bad right before Christmas. And we all spent the night at UVM Cancer Hospital with my Mimi on Christmas Eve that year. But then things started to turn the other direction. Things were really going well. She was back in, like, she looked like herself again. She was acting like herself. She was feeling fine. And it was right in the middle of her doing well, actually, that she passed.
Wow.
So at least she wasn't suffering. And that was in February, I want to say, of 2018. And it was in March of 2018 that we actually debuted our branded Chaga tea bags and the rest of our products.
Wow. Wow. Did you notice or with some of that healing that you noticed, do you could you correlate it to her use of the mushrooms? Or do you feel like you have any of that?
I mean, I think honestly, there was a lot going on and a lot that I don't really remember that was out of my control. She was on chemotherapy and radiation at the same time, so I think it would be a stretch and just untruthful to say whether or not. But
Right.
I think part of it is the mind as well, mind over matter, or the mind body connection. Like she was a total optimist, and so between the chaga, thinking positively, telling herself she was going to do better, I think it really helped. Um, you know,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That mindset is so critical and important and such a practice too to do every day in whatever way that you can weave it into your lifestyle is to work on the mindset. Cause I'm sure that as soon as you said her optimism, I'm like, uh-huh, yeah, I know. My mom is very optimistic and has had a lot of health challenges. So I think that's definitely helped her as
mhm.
hard as the struggle is. So okay, so back to the novice a little bit because I'm thinking about maybe people who aren't too familiar with mushrooms as well as myself and thinking, sometimes what holds us back from starting something new is just the fear of the unknown. So, are there any, things to be aware of? I mean, you kind of already mentioned like if you're doing something new, your body's never experienced it, you got to be aware that you might have some digestive upset, but is there anything like do's and don'ts or common fears?
That's a really good point to bring up, and uh, I think that a common fear is that it's going to taste like mushrooms, or that chaga is going to taste like mushrooms, or even some of the other tinctures. Um, they don't necessarily taste like mushrooms. Actually, chaga as a tea is quite good. It tastes like the day I drank it from my grandmother's fridge, I really just thought I was drinking an iced tea. I had no idea. Um, some of the mushrooms do taste like mushrooms, but like don't let the fact that you don't like mushrooms prevent you from experiencing the healing benefits of some of these mushroom supplements or tinctures, because they're kind of different things. These are like wood decomposing, bark eating brackets that grow out of trees. They're not like your typical uh, mushroom that grows out of the ground that has a weird texture. It's more of like a solid woody mass that we're extracting. So it's different. Again, fungi is a broad kingdom of life. They actually out variety plants 10 to 1. So don't let your previous and perhaps limited experience with mushrooms prevent you from exploring mushrooms. You know, uh, the main mushrooms that we eat are kind of basic and rather boring, I think, because they're easy to be cultivated, right? A lot of the mushrooms that we sell are kind of difficult to cultivate. Um, but so there's that. And I guess I have a bit of an opposite perspective on that. And it's funny because I was talking to somebody who harvests chaga for me actually, and he's sitting there drinking his like red Gatorade, and we were talking, and I tried to get him to try chaga, and he buys it or harvests it for me. I buy it from him, and he was like, "Oh no, I ain't touching that." And I was like, "What are you talking about? You're not touching that? Like, come on, try it." And he wouldn't try it, and it was like one of my products, and I was like, I got mad at him. I actually got mad. I was like, "Why aren't you willing to try this?" Like,
Yeah, you're
so,
touching it all the time. You're handling it. You're in it, right?
and and that for me was just a learning moment. I was like, wow, like I guess that some people really are afraid of the unknown. But like the one thing I tried to remind him, and I would urge everyone to remind themselves, is that like this is actually a lot closer to home than 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 red Gatorade, for example, right? Like than anything that you would typically buy at the store. Like, and actually all of our ancestors, basically anywhere where any of these mushrooms have grown, here in America, in Asia, in Russia, in Europe, everywhere that these mushrooms have been grown, they've been used by indigenous people. So I think that's worth mentioning for sure. I mean, this is not a new thing.
Right, right. I love that you brought up the word ancestors because that's what I was talking to someone else about this week about, all this confusion around eating and what to eat and what diet to follow. And it's like, did your ancestors eat it? Then it's probably okay.
Hmm.
That's my way of simplifying nutrition is to say that. So, and you also touched on something regarding like the harvesting and if something's widely available, if it's sort of farmed, I don't know if that's the right word for this, but your line is wild. Could you talk a little bit about the quality of wild?
Yeah. So, and I'll just want to be clear and transparent. Our chaga, reishi, turkey tail, and artist conch is all wild harvested. We do purchase the lion's mane and the maitake from a cultivator. Um, and so, yeah, basically wild mushrooms, the reason a lot of these mushrooms evolved to be the way that they are and have the benefits that they do is because they, grow in the wild, decomposing 100-year-old sentient trees. A lot like chaga, the betulinic acid, and the inositol, those are compounds that stem directly from betula, which is the genus of birch trees. You're not going to have betulin in chaga unless it comes from a betula genus tree, right? So when you get cultivating these mushrooms, I think it's important to take a few things into consideration. Number one, make sure that the medium that you're growing it on um, is actually going to be rich in the compounds and the source of the benefits that the mushroom ends up, you know, um, synthesizing for itself. The other thing is that there's a number of ways that, things can get, or what's the word? Uh,
Diluted.
the organic, I almost wanted to say diluted, but the organic integrity can be threatened by different ways of cultivating. So, like, for example, if you're using sawdust that you're going to use as your medium, you want to make sure that's not coming from a mill where the lumber's been treated with chemicals. You want to make sure that anything that you're using, isn't being contaminated by some other human process. So, cultivation of mushrooms is a great thing. It makes a lot of mushrooms more abundantly available. Like the lion's mane and maitake, we do source wild lion's mane and wild maitake. We just don't have enough of it here to fill our needs like we do with the chaga. We have plenty of chaga, we have plenty of reishi, we have plenty of turkey tail. So we make sure that like the cultivator we work with, they're certified organic. I also know that they do wild simulation cultivation, which means that they're actually growing it on like logs of beech trees in outdoors rather than like indoors on bags of sawdust. So there's different ways of cultivating mushrooms. Just make sure you educate yourself on the way that your mushrooms are sourced, what the mushroom origin is, um, and if possible, how it's grown, because that would give you the full picture.
That makes a lot of sense. You got to go deeper and then just, the front label marketing of things that you're purchasing. You have to understand a little bit about that quality component because if you are trying to treat some kind of health challenge that you have, if you're trying to address that with the application of mushrooms or whatever, you have to know that it's all supportive and you're not adding anything that's detrimental. So that's really important. And speaks loudly to your brand because I know that's something that you value. So
Yeah.
comes through in the story. So that's good. And then lastly, Garrett, could you tell us a little bit about? I know I listened to that other podcast you were on. What was that, by the way? I keep plugging it. Might as well say the name.
It was Mushroom Apprentice.
Oh yeah, the Mushroom Apprentice. So that was a good episode. I learned a lot. And in that, I think I heard you talk a little bit about the critical importance of sort of like land ownership and like just the advocacy or the story that needs to be told or the jeopardy that we could be in losing these things if we don't sort of
Yeah.
take control. So maybe you could share about your plan and just first off, like why is that important?
Yeah, it's funny because I just got off of a phone call right before this about a piece of land I'm going to look at tomorrow to potentially purchase. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to build a regenerative supply chain, especially for chaga, because I mean, we work with a lot of mushrooms, but chaga is what we specialize in and what we move the most of. Um, Chaga is also unique because chaga really can't be cultivated. Chaga is not a mushroom, it's a sclerotia, which is an organ developed only by parasitic fungi as a result of the battle between like the fungi with the living host tree, right? So chaga and the birch are in this battle for years, and the chaga develops as a protective organ for the fungus to protect itself from the birch tree and its continuous attempts to dispel the fungus. So, and it's since we're more closely related to fungi that those protective compounds actually help us. Um, so that's just on chaga, what a sclerotia is. But the reason that's really challenging for us is because okay, we can't really cultivate chaga. Well, at least not in any way that's faster. Chaga takes like 8 years to grow, and it has to happen with a living tree. So we're looking for a piece of land that we can purchase with enough eligible trees where we can start inoculating them with chaga. We will manage the upgrowth of the birch trees to make sure there's always birch trees coming because the chaga will kill the tree.
Mm.
And
So
then
is it, am I accurate in saying it's the battle between the tree and the parasite that makes the chaga?
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yep. Um, and so basically like my concern right now, and I do have a unique perspective because I lease 220,000 acres of timberlands here in the Adirondacks. And like what I see on these timberlands is basically that they're cutting yellow birch trees really intensely right now. Any yellow birch tree that is over 8 inches in diameter is being cut, and that indicates basically every substantial chaga bearing yellow birch tree. And that's just what is adopted as the current profitable selective timber harvesting protocols. And these are things that are also state incentivized. I mean, this is something that like, there's a program where you can get between a 50, or I'm sorry, you can get an 80% tax abatement if you own between 50 and 100 acres of land and you commit to harvesting the timber and selling 6% of the profits to the state. And I don't want to get into the politics of this, and it varies everywhere, right?
Right.
But basically, uh, the way that forests are managed is very timber focused and timber centric, I call it. Because all that they're really looking at is the value of the timber on the land. And right now, where I am, what has happened is that a lot of the historically expensive, most valuable tree species, the hardwood trees, have basically all been cut. So what that leaves is yellow birch trees as one of the few types of trees that is still abundant that basically is also profitable. So, and I'm learning every day what it's actually used for. But yellow birch trees, as it turns out, are used to make pallets because it's very, very hard and it's very strong. Think about how many pallets we go through and burn. Um, Yellow birch trees are used for their veneer, which is basically this thin layer. They'll take the first 8 feet of the trunk and they'll take they basically run it through a lathe and they peel off like a spool or like a thin sheet of it, and they layer doors and wooden furniture so they get this hardwood furniture look where most of the furniture isn't actually real wood, but they layer it in the veneer. um, and so yellow birch trees are used for that. They're used for firewood. There's all sorts of uses for these trees, and yellow birch trees are currently the target. So
Wow.
a lot of the harvesting that we do on our land lease is just sort of like trying to figure out where they're logging next and getting there before they actually cut the trees. Because once they cut the trees, when they come down and hit the ground and get pulled, the chaga just breaks off and falls apart and goes to waste. So
Mm.
I see that a lot of this is happening, and a lot of these large tracts of land are basically just getting logged and then sold to the state. The amount of private land ownership is just sort of like shrinking, and a lot of these tracts are large and have already been there's already easements to the state of New York, and so they can't be subdivided, and they're probably just going to get sold to the state. And the state has these 7 principles of no trace, which I think is a great thing. I like what New York State has done with their wild forests, and I'm blessed to be surrounded by all the state land. But if none of it's available for commercial utilization of the land, then what's happening is there's just less and less land where there's going to be chaga uh, to be able to be produced. So, I'm just trying to think ahead of the curve. This isn't a current problem, but I do think in the next 15 years or so, we could see a shortage available commercially of wild chaga because of what is happening right now with the logging industry and just the geopolitics of the world. um,
Right.
that
Right.
chaga could become scarce. And, I would be concerned that then these fake chaga alternatives that are grown indoors that don't actually have any of the same compounds would become mainstream. And, our perception of what chaga even is will change such that, it will be reduced to a GMO unless someone can actually ensure that there's a wild supply of real chaga.
Wow. And it's not something that the everyday person really knows much about. So, I
So,
mean, I can't help it. My marketing brain goes into like, have you thought about, since you're so knowledgeable and you're in it and you have a story and you have the knowledge, have you thought about creating like a Kickstarter campaign and creating a mini documentary about this?
I actually, yes, and the documentary piece of it, I'm working with a guy who works at HBO. and he's one of my best friends, and we've been working on this for years. And I think this, what I'm talking about right now, is what I'm starting to realize is the essence of the documentary, right?
Yeah.
Because we had wanted to make a documentary about mushrooms, and we just started capturing all this footage, and but as time goes on, I'm starting to realize like this is what it's about. This is really the key. This is what's important and what I want to leave as my legacy. This summer I was able to harvest chaga spores for the very first time, because you have to find a birch tree that chaga has killed, and it takes like a year after that it will actually develop spores, and all of these insects flock to it and eat those spores. So it's very rare to actually find it in its viable state where it's spore bearing. I found two this summer, and I was able to collect the spores, and now I have those spores on hand. I was able to take birch syrup and birch sap and basically make liquid cultures of chaga grow. So I have chaga mycelium growing on birch sap, and I'm going to try and take that and basically form some sort of inoculant material, so that when I buy land, I can go and just start plugging trees with chaga. And then it will be 8 years, 10 years from there that they all start to have a substantial harvestable yield. But I don't see any reason why you could not implement that as a model. You just have to be proactive enough to do it 10 years in advance.
Right, right. Wow. Well, I, for one, am grateful that you're involved in all of this because I think it's so important to preserve the practices of things that have, like you said, have gone on for centuries amongst many cultures, and that things that have healing properties that can help support the body with a variety of different things. So I've enjoyed this so much, Garrett. This has been such a great conversation. It went off in different areas that I wasn't necessarily anticipating, but I think it was all really valuable to share with other people. So thank you so much for your time. I know that you're a busy family business. So from one family business to another, I'm going to let you go. So you have to get ready with a lot of other things. I'm sure you're on the docket for today. So, and for anyone who's curious about the tinctures that Garrett has available, as well as other products. I mean, first off, we carry the tinctures at Nature's Garden, or you can go to ngvitamins.com. But you can also check out more about Garrett and his work at birchboys.com, right? All right. Well, thank you so much. And until next time.
Thanks, Gary.
All right. Great. So I hit